Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Digital marketing has moved forwards, but most consulting firms haven't. Many consulting firms still see their corporate blog as their sole digital marketing channel and find themselves frustrated when these blogs yield little, if any, results. For those consultancies that understand digital marketing, though, it can be a huge asset and help them achieve rapid business growth. In fact, at Create Engage, we've recently written a case study of one successful consulting firm that used digital marketing to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years. Having spent countless hours researching consulting firms and consulting leaders for this podcast, it became very clear that while some firms do digital marketing well, the vast majority of consulting firms struggle to leverage its power and don't know where to start. To help those of you who want to harness the power of digital marketing to grow your consulting business, but don't have the knowledge, capacity, or in-house capability to do so, I launched Create Engage, the first digital marketing agency for the management consulting industry. As former consultants ourselves, we understand the challenges that you face when it comes to delivering effective digital marketing that engages prospective clients and generates leads. Having worked in the industry, we understand consulting buyers, what resonates with them and what doesn't. This enables us to harness the latest in digital marketing in a way that aligns with your brand and your market positioning to attract the prospective clients that you're looking to target. We understand that each consultancy is unique and have a range of services to help you shape, implement and sustain effective digital marketing strategies that deliver results, regardless of where you are on your digital marketing journey. If you would like to find out more about how Create Engage can help you use digital marketing to take your business to the next level, then send me an email at nick@createengage.co.uk or go to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can download that free case study that breaks down the digital marketing strategies used by one successful consulting firm to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years and gives you the secrets they used so that you can apply them in your own firm. If you want to outpace your competitors and stand out in the crowded consulting market, then get in touch. We'd love to help you grow your business through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climbing Consulting. Today's episode represents a huge landmark for the show, and I can't believe we are here already. Today's episode is episode 50 of Climbing Consulting, and it is crazy to think that something that I started as a little side project almost 2 years ago has grown to where it is now. To celebrate episode 50 and do something a little different, I wanted to turn the tables and actually take a dose of my own medicine. Today's episode is taken from a live YouTube recording that we did a couple of months ago and sees me interviewed by my good friend, Create Engage client, and host of the fantastic 40-Minute Mentor podcast, James Mitra from JBM. Over the last 2 years, I have spoken to countless podcast listeners on all sorts of topics relating to how to climb in consulting. We have spoken about everything from my advice for getting into the consulting industry through to why I left and the guidance I give people if they're thinking of leaving the industry. And also more recently, since launching Create Engage, my advice for how to start your own business or how to move out of consulting and become an independent contractor. And now I've spoken to a number of people on a one-on-one basis on this, but I wanted to bring all of this together and give you the chance to find out a little bit more about me, find out a bit more about my journey, and hopefully learn a few things that may help you along the way. It's worth saying that as this was being recorded live for YouTube, there were a few little hiccups with the audio in just the first 5 to 10 minutes. So please bear with it. After that first 10 minutes or so, everything gets back to normal and it is just the same as all of my other interviews and just the quality you would expect of any episode of Climbing Consulting. Likewise, it's worth saying that James and I, before this interview, had had dinner, we had had a few non-alcoholic beers, and we were both nicely relaxed by the time we came to the interview. So we jump around a little in this conversation, we go back and forth, we dive off into some tangents, a few anecdotes, but please stick with us. We cover some hugely important topics and ones that I know many of you have wanted to hear about. We cover some great listener questions and many topics that I know from speaking to people informally that people are struggling with and need help with. So I really hope that you get something of value from this interview and from the areas that we talk about in it. So with all of that said, sit back, grab your own alcoholic or non-alcoholic beverage, and without further ado, please enjoy my interview for Climbing Consulting. This is live video and will be going out on audio on the podcast. This will be episode 50. I can't believe that we're at episode 50 already. It's crazy. And very kindly, my good friend James Mitra from JBM also runs his own podcast, 40 Minute Mentor, which I highly recommend checking out, and I'm sure we'll touch on later, has agreed to interview me. So I don't usually do these sort of things. The podcast is very much about my guests and about sharing their learnings and their insights. But I know from a number of you have reached out, and there's actually a guest of mine who suggested it. You thought you might want to hear some things from me. So hopefully this is an interesting interview for you. You find it useful, and we will see where we go from there. So yeah, should we kick off, mate, and see how it goes?
Great stuff. Well, Nick, thank you for letting me do this. Much appreciated. I am a big fan of the podcast and have listened to you on the other side of the mic. So it's a pleasure to turn the tables and hopefully ask some challenging questions. But yeah, I guess that to kick things off, I wanted to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests on the 40 Minute Mentor. Shameless plug.
Sure, mate. No.
Do you mind giving us and our listeners an overview of your CV in 30 seconds, please?
Oh, 30 seconds. I've always thought
and I'm going to count this.
Shall I let you get the timer out?
All right, the time is up.
Tell me when to go.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Didn't have a clue what to do after university. Family friend by chance had a job at the FSA, told me about it, sounded brilliant. Internship there, grad job there, got tired of it, moved into consulting, got tired of it, moved into a state agency, failed at a state agency, became a contractor, started a podcast, then launched a digital marketing agency, and that brings us up to speed. How did I do?
18 seconds. That's a record.
There you go, mate. You wanted it. I didn't want to overrun. So.
No, excellent. And even though it was 18 seconds, there is plenty for us to unpack over the course of this conversation. I guess that given the name of your podcast and your background in consulting, I think that's probably a good place to start. So can you, I guess, enlighten us a bit on how you got into consulting and for you, what were the biggest lessons, transferable skills that you've learned sort of in your consulting journey, I guess, particularly at Baringa?
Yeah, so how did I get into consulting? So there's a theme a lot by chance. And I think it was when I was a grad, sort of going at university, I looked at consulting. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, and consulting sounded great. So I applied for a few, got an interview at Deloitte, and I remember the guy must have thought I was an idiot. It was an awful interview, and I remember leaving there, and it was something about some case study about a mining village. I don't know. But anyway, failed miserably there. And it was more that as I'd spent time at the FSA, I love what you do at the regulator. And, people, if anyone ever sort of thought it's boring, it's not. I was in more boardrooms as a 21-year-old regulator than I've ever been as a consultant. It's crazy. But I got tired of not being able to fix things. You go in and you've got to tell people what's wrong. That's your job. But you can't then tell them what to do, because if you've told them what to do and the regulator says it, well, it's got to be right. So you always had that sort of leading someone to a problem and not a solution. And that I realized after a year of just a fantastic time learning, I was like, that's not going to be for me. So consulting wise, actually applied for Accenture, got into their grad scheme, but a long, they hire people for a year in advance. So that wasn't for me. And Baringa was actually a chance conversation. A family friend worked at the time for the Barclay Partnership, where one of my guests, Michael's been on from. And it was just one of those chats over a beer. And he said, well, I know this firm called Baringa. At the time, I didn't have a clue who they were. And he's like, yeah, they're getting a reputation for themselves. They don't take analysts, but I know someone there. Let me send your CV and see if they do. And a long story short, I was number two analyst in FS, which was a great experience. Obviously they're phenomenally bigger now and, have a sort of grad intake and an intern intake. But yeah, it was very much by chance. And actually this is where I think sort of some things it's interesting where fate leads you. So I remember Accenture called me. I was meant to start the September after, so called this January. And they called me and said, we got a space in March, it might have been. But my notice period at the FSA, three months. And I remember I went and asked the head of department, which at that time, I'm 21, he's 50, that was scary. If I could, I'm off, can I go? And they wouldn't release me. They were like, no, you can leave, obviously, really? But you're serving your 3 months notice. And so, which is frankly fair. That's what that's what we've contracted. Yeah. But yeah, so then it was, if I couldn't do that, you're not going in, it was like another 9 or 10 months. So it was actually, if that had come off, it could have been a different path. But yeah, that was how I got in.
It's a different way in to a lot of people, a lot of candidates we work with over the years. And for you, what was it particularly about Baringa? Because you could have gone to a Deloitte or an Accenture. And Baringa at the time, did that feel like a risk?
I think it all felt like a risk. I mean, I knew nothing about consulting. I still struggle to tell people what we do, but it didn't feel like a risk because the people I met there and the process, it felt good. And I knew I wanted to go into consulting. I'd had someone I trusted say, these are the guys to go to. The recruitment process is great. And they are great, but this isn't just an advert. And, it's not all about recruitment, but it was a really good process. And there's also, mate, part of me was, I wanted to get into consulting. So there was an element of naivety of, they do seem good. And, there was part of that I remember interviewing for some other firms at the time who I didn't get that feeling for. And I may have taken if that had been the only option, but to your point, it didn't feel right. So yeah, that hopefully answers that side of it.
Absolutely. And for you, the sort of, what were those transferable skills that you took out of that experience in consulting that you've, I guess, used in your entrepreneurial journey since?
I think that the thing I learned, particularly in those early days, it's just a massive jump in terms of the standards and the quality that's expected and the speed of that. I remember my first 2 weeks, I was going home just shattered, like my brain was fried. And I was just thinking, can I, if this is every day, can I do it? And I think I always think of things like sport. And I think in sport, it's so easy to say, well, obviously a Premiership team is better than a fifth division or a first division team. But I think in work, in business in general, we all wear the same clothes. We all go into the same places. And so that's not to say one place is better than another, but you just see these offices, they all look the same. You don't know what goes on behind sort of those doors. And I think that was the biggest shock for me. Is I remember the first thing I got given was like, right, go and figure this out. And I just remember thinking, never heard of that in my life. Like, what do you want me to do? And it was a real learning curve, but that really set me up. And I think that ability to solve problems, to your direct question, that ability to solve problems, dealing with people, just the speed of learning because you're with a different client every few months, that is massive. And it's something I say to anyone I know who's sort of graduating or looking for that sort of first career move of, you can't go wrong with a career that gives you all of these experiences so quickly, because with anything in life, it's that repetition that gets you there. So actually, if you've worked in one place for 3 years or you've worked with 3 different clients over 3 years, you're probably going to have more experience that way. And then the other one was just learning from people and networking. And, I'm sure we'll come on to sort of some of the podcast stuff, but the power of sort of to your podcast, the power of mentorship and learning from people, and actually how by identifying the right people and learning from them, you can get so much. And it doesn't have to be a formal degree or a formal course, but just watching people who are great at what they do it is a phenomenal learning experience.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, and I think given that we work with a lot of management consultants, we recruit for them, I get a lot of people asking about making that transition into consulting. And one of the big things that I always say is exactly what you've just alluded to, is it is a great grounding, those transferable skills that you've obviously developed over time, and they really do set you up. I guess that brings me on to my next question. A lot of the people that I've interviewed with the 40-Minute Mentor, we talk about kind of the origins of the story and actually sort of them in younger life and what they wanted to be. Was there ever a long-term desire to be a management consultant?
Of course, mate. On that day when you go to school, it's like, what do you want to be? You say management consultant. Yeah, of course, mate. I always wanted to be a management consultant. Doesn't everyone?
No. What did you actually want to be when you were a child?
I think the biggest challenge, mate, is I didn't know what a management consultant was till I was about 20. I think it's a bigger point about the industry, but there's a lot of, if you're not part of the right schools, or you don't get, you don't grow up in the right areas, if you're not exposed to these careers, you don't know. So I didn't, I wouldn't know what a banker, lawyer, consultant was. I didn't know that till I went to university. And suddenly, I always remember I wanted to be a lawyer because I remember they had the glossy brochures and they had the best gifts on the Freshers' Fair. And I remember they were the only career where they published the salaries. So I was like,
that's the one.
I can do that. And then I realised what law involves and thought, no, mate, I'll leave that to someone else. But I didn't know. No, I think up and sort of, particularly those early moves, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I basically kept my options open. So I didn't want to be a doctor or a dentist. So I was like, right, well, what else is there? And then at university, did a really broad degree because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And, I think quite a few people go into consulting because they don't know what they want to do. But no, when I was a kid, I didn't think about what I wanted to do. I thought, what's the next PlayStation game?
No, that's fair enough. I think it's telling that when you decided to make the move into consulting, there were the bigger options, but then there were the entrepreneurial options, which are, you went to Baringa, which is a truly entrepreneurial business. And I think clearly you've gone on to show that you are somebody that's created a business. You've actually set up 2 businesses. At which point in your career did you come to that realization that you could do it yourself? Sort of go out and go it alone and take the plunge. When did that come into the journey?
Yeah, and I'm going to say it as well. Thank you to everyone who has given us questions, because I know that was one of the ones.
That was, yes.
And for those of you who have got questions in here, we haven't got your names in because I didn't know if you wanted to be name checked, because my LinkedIn profile is one thing, the podcast is a complete another. So if you did, sorry, I can do it in the intro. Let me know afterwards. But if you didn't, I hope you're happy. So when did I know?
Yeah, I guess the question is, when did you come to realization that you could do it yourself?
Well, I think the first thing, mate, is I don't know if I can do it myself. So, you've been very flattering. The first business failed, and this one is very young. So, but I think there's a few things, particularly around the other side of that question is why did you leave consulting? And I think that's one that I get quite a lot, because that, there is a curiosity. And I think there was a whole mix of things that coincided with that, and rightly or wrongly. So I think one thing is I was part of that generation where social media was quite new, and I think I got suckered a little bit by, I was in consulting as a long-term career plan. You can do extremely well out of it, and in 20 years you can retire, but that's quite, when you're 21, 40 seems a lifetime away. And I think I was getting all these ads from Facebook of 21-year-old millionaires on beaches, and sort of thinking, well, there's not much that those guys look different to me. So there was that part of me, and there was the other side of me that was just, I'd gone into the city and consulting as like I want to, partly it's, you want an income and you're like, this looks great. And you want to prove, for me, it was very much, part of it was proving that I could do it. It's like, look how good my career is. I'm doing great things. I'm a consultant. Consulting sounds cool. There were 2 things that really stick out, and one's going to sound absolutely stupid, but I say this also because I'm sure there's other people out there like this. And I think, so I'll start with the first and I'll go on to the second. So the first one was just, I think I got obsessed with like pushing to get the next pay rise, because when you're sort of 21, 22, and this isn't to belittle it, a $2,000 pay rise is huge to anyone, but back then you're like, oh, $2,000, that's this, that's that. And I got, I think, a bit too obsessed with that, and just having the trappings of success. You could sort of, consulting pays well, and you can start to afford things that you didn't have before. And I was like, I'll get that. And actually, none of it really made me happy. It's like that, I've got it, what do I do now? And part of that, middle class deferred gratification, you're like, something must be there. I'll go and get the next thing and the next thing. And it sounds really stupid, but I always remember we were very fortunate, got a lovely flat, very young, managed to get it all furnished. And I remember just thinking, like, I want one of those fancy toasters. The Breville ones?
Yeah.
Fancy toasters. I told you it'd be stupid. But I just remember sitting on the sofa and just thinking, I was probably 24, 25. And I was like, got savings going into the bank. I'm doing all the middle class stuff. I'm saving a good amount going into my pension. And I was just like, if I'm spending my life, if my ambition is to own a Breville toaster, something's wrong here.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. It's so easy to fall into that trap, isn't it? And I think, and we talk to a lot of people at that point of their career that are just chasing the salary increases and going up the ladder. And I think, I wonder how many of them actually take a step back and go, actually, am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Am I doing something that, am I looking further? And I think that's what you clearly did. You came to this realization, and it's definitely benefited you.
Well, and mate, I won't pretend. I think the danger, and one of the things that I hope sort of my podcast gets across, sorry, we've had a non-alcoholic beer and it's gone to my head. One of the reasons I started the podcast, and one of the things that I hope it shares with people, is I think as a society, because everything's so fast, you sort of condense success to that soundbite, don't you? Like, went to uni, did a startup, made billions, sunset. And actually, life's not like that. And so I'm sure we'll come on to like more around that transition, because moving from a structured career like consulting into anything is actually quite hard, because there's so many differences and so many changes and challenges. But I just remember thinking, like, that's not for me. And likewise, I'm now at the point where I've got friends and colleagues and former colleagues where they're actually in the opposite challenge of, they've stayed so long, the golden handcuffs there because the money's good, but it's like, suddenly that's a big jump. And for me, it was like, right, this isn't going to work. But and I was wrong, actually. I said 2 things. There were 3 things. So that was thing 1. Thing 2 was actually a Baringa Christmas event. So they had Bronick Masiada, who is the CEO of Hiscox, been on the show, come and speak. And it was actually why I reached out to him for the interview, because of what he said. And so the thing he said, to paraphrase it all, was he moved from consulting into industry. That's all you need to know. And he said, consulting's always there. You can always go back, as long as you're not right, these weren't his words, but basically, as long as you're not an idiot and you're not rubbish at it, you're always going to be able to go back. And there will always be a consulting firm who wants you. You know, the industry isn't going anywhere. And if you've got to a certain level in a certain type of firm, either they or one of their competitors will always take you back. So there was that safety net of it. And then the third thing, actually, man, and I think this is actually what it certainly held me back, and I think it holds a lot of people back. I mean, you tell me from the people you speak to, but the sort of thing that tipped me over the edge and was like, right, I can do this, was actually, I was on a car rally with 4 friends. I highly recommend. It's called, I think, Wacky Rally. I'll make sure I stick it in the show notes. The goal is you've got to get from like Paris to Barcelona. It was something like that, and you could only spend 300 quid on the car. So fantastic, like, great fun. But I remember, so we were driving over to Paris in a Honda C-Max, I think it was, you know, the big family people carrier that we picked up off a Hackney council estate.
Beauty.
Not only that, we then took it to my mate. He worked in a car company. So we took it there and we painted it what we thought was like zebra stripe with like purple and black. I mean, it probably looked like something, you know, a kid had drawn. And the best bit, man, this was the best bit. We bought off Amazon some rims, like 50 quid spinners. So you can imagine us there. Anyway, we're on there.
Something out of a hip hop video.
Oh, right, and we had the garb. You know, that was the intention. With velour inside. I'll show you pictures after, mate. It was fantastic. Sadly, it only lasted about 100 miles. Engine blew up, and you know, another story. But we're on the Eurotunnel, and we had eyed up. There was an Aston Martin in front, and there was a Ferrari, and we were like, you know, because the Eurotunnel you can sort of cruise into lanes. We're like, let's be clever, boys. Let's get near one of them so we can, you know, because we've got like our rapper gear on. We're like, we can get some pictures, you know, have a bit of fun. I've got a picture of me in the Ferrari, which I'll show you afterwards. Anyway, we get in, get talking to the guy in the Ferrari, and sort of finding out his story because it's interesting. He's got a Ferrari. He's something, you know, there's a story. And the guy's also 35, let's say. And basically, long and short, this bloke, normal bloke, had started a business, sold a business. The thing that really stuck with me from this is, I think because I had grown up, particularly when I was at the regulator, I met loads of boards. And all of the boards sounded like I do now. It sounded like they're posh public school boys. I'm not. But I quickly was like, that is the way to be successful. So sort of, you know, develop the mannerisms, develop the accent, because you fit in, you do better wherever you are. And I remember seeing this bloke who was just a perfectly normal bloke, had made obviously a lot of money, and just seemed down to earth as well. Because I think that's the other thing. There were times when I met sort of very senior people who were quite, stiffs is really unfair, but, you know, quite formal. And I sort of thought, oh, you've got to be formal, you've got to be old. And this bloke just smashed all of those illusions. And that was, I guess, for me, the sort of last domino that then made me go, right, it's time to think about doing something. Mm-hmm. Now, actually, I did something. The something was with a friend that didn't work out and became my own thing. But that, for me, was the big thing. And I appreciate some of those might sound really silly, but I'd be interested, you know, how many of those resonate with, I guess, you and some of your candidates as well?
No, definitely. Well, I'm sure there are listeners out there that a lot of that will resonate, and I won't go into it now. But one of the things that tipped me over the edge to set JBM up was meeting an entrepreneur on a train, and it was just over a couple of beers and hearing about his story that made me go, do you know what, I've got to do this. And I think sometimes you need that push.
Yeah.
You've alluded to, I guess, the risk that you've taken. And here is another listener question. So thank you for this. Can you tell us a bit more about the risk you've taken in your career? And I guess particularly where you've succeeded and what you've learned from the failures.
Wow, the failures are more interesting, aren't they?
Let's start with the failures.
Let's always start there. Well, I don't know about you. This isn't blowing my own trumpet. I always used to remember the one thing I hated was when you'd go into a performance review or like a feedback meeting and you'd only get good feedback. So that's why I'm going to give you bad feedback. You don't learn anything from good feedback. If I tell you all my successes, your
feedback is a gift.
Well, only if it's bad. If they're just telling you you're great, then you sort of like, okay, well, my view was always, and you know, with hindsight, this was a wrong view, but if you're not telling me I'm bad, I should be running the company. And if I'm not running the company, something's wrong. So what is it I need to work on? Obviously, assuming I'm not going to be running the company, because if there's nothing for me to work on, why aren't I running the company? So that was just that's a side bit. Where did I go wrong, mate? Where do you want to start? I mean, bloody hell, which one should we start
with? You've alluded to the fact that one of your businesses failed, so why don't you start with that?
Well, I think start before that, because I figure also, for a consulting podcast with a consulting audience, I mean, there's plenty of times, you know, you make mistakes with clients, you make mistakes with internal people, you push too hard on people, you stamp your feet too much about money. I did all of these. You get too drunk at client things, did that. I mean, I don't know if we'll talk about drinking, but, you know, we did that as well. I mean, the business was a sort of whole mix of errors, but also things that, you know, is one of those, isn't it? Would you do it again type things? And for me, I definitely would. So there's a few. I mean, partly I started it with a friend and went into it knowing there was a risk that if for whatever reason we didn't keep it going, our friendship might fail because of that. And sadly, we did part ways. Now, actually, with hindsight, I think we're talking again and get on really well now. But that obviously did massively sort of impact that friendship for a long time, for a good few years. And actually, my friend who it was has gone on to be a very successul estate agent. He is a great estate agent. Actually, it was estate agency wasn't my thing. I wanted to do a thing, and part of to your point about part of what I did wrong, well, with the business massively. I mean, firstly, being an estate agent. One of the things I think for consultants particularly, when you go into consulting, you are always put across as an expert, and also you learn how to be an expert in front of clients. And so you think you can be an expert at everything. And I certainly did. At 25, I was like, estate agents are monkeys. Of course I can do this. But that was completely wrong. The market is what it is, and estate agents are very good at what they do because the market is like it is. And I was coming at it as a consultant, trying to apply consulting to a estate agency, which was stupid, And so that's where one of my first mistakes was thinking I could be great at a business that I've got no idea about and I've never worked in. So it's funny, I was doing a bit of sort of mentoring, advising for a startup that was in our office, and they were doing estate agency or something like it. And this was exactly what I said to them. It was like, have any of you gone to an estate agent? No, we just think they're rubbish. And I'm like, well, I'm sure you get it the same with recruitment. People are like, well, all you got to do is find a CV.
Absolutely. It's not rocket science, but it's not as straightforward as some people think. So
well, and I think
there's always nuances with these sorts of things.
Well, exactly. And I think the thing is, because a lot of people, we all went to university, and you grow up with like academia being the bar. Actually, when you come out into the real world, you realize there's so many skills they don't teach you. How to get on with people, how to judge people, how to understand what someone means when they don't say it. And now a lot of these things you need in consulting, but in industries like yours, you need them, much more. And so that was a real problem. A real mistake was thinking I knew an industry I knew nothing about and thinking I could be the best at it. Now you need, you know this, you run your own business. You need to think you're good at what you do. Don't get me wrong. But at 25, I was not going to be a good estate agent. The other one was probably, while I'm very glad I went out, I had sort of, timing-wise, I had split with my business partner probably a week before leaving Baringa.
Okay.
And actually there was like a moment where it was like, well, do I do this, or do I not? And with hindsight, financially and for all of the sort of other reasons, it probably would have been better to stay. Now, it's hard to say that because I wouldn't be where I am without that. But yeah, I mean, that's mistake number one, right? How many how many more do you want?
Perhaps it would be interesting for the listeners who work in consulting at the moment. Were there any things in your consulting career that you look back on and go, oh, that was something I learned from?
Oh, where to start? I think there's a few, and I think I'll start with career and I'll go on to client, because there's probably only one massive client regret I've got. But the career one is generally slow down. I think part of what led me out of consulting was just overworking myself. And part of that was because consulting is brilliant in a career structure of, and I think it's a fantastic career, it's worth saying. And for people who are doing it, it's brilliant. But it's great in terms of career structure is very simple in that you climb through the grades. And now obviously it's not simple to climb through the grades, but from a progression perspective, it's very structured. And what that naturally does if you're that sort of person, which many consultants are, like myself, is, okay, it's 2 years a grade. You work that out, it's 12 years to partner, let's say. But if I do a grade in 18 months, I get to partner 2 years earlier. So that leads you down this path of working exceptionally hard to do that. And I think I was listening to a podcast maybe a year or two ago with Derek Sivers. Have you heard of Derek Sivers? Yeah. He's awesome. So he founded a company called CD Baby, which was like the first ever online CD distribution website in the US, sold it for something like 25 or 30 million. And then gave it all to charity. And basically he is a trust. So he obviously makes a living from it. But the rest is a musical charity.
Oh, wow.
Coolest guy. I'll send you his books. It's awesome. But he was telling a story, and it brings us to this of, he used a metaphor of going for a cycle. So he said, look, I used to go for a cycle and I'd go flat out there and back and I'd make it in 45 minutes. And I'd be red, I'd hate it, I'd be tired. You've probably done the same. When you go for a run, you don't really hammer yourself.
Well, I'm too lazy these days to go.
Oh, you're talking about your boxing, your Pilates.
Wow. Yeah, you're inspiring me to go for a run. I will do.
But he was then made the point, well, the next day he went out and he was like, actually, I'm going to chill out. I'm going to cycle, don't get me wrong, but I'm gonna take it a bit more relaxed. And I'm sure you found the same. I know I have. If I go for a jog, like I can hammer it, and it'll be a 15-minute jog, or I can take my foot off a little, still get a good run, and it'll be 16 minutes. And that was that was exactly the mistake here. Is I made certain decisions and pushed myself too hard, and probably thought I had to push myself too hard to get a grade jump in 18 months. And, okay, it's great because I can say to a recruiter like you at the time, I've made it in 18 months, I'm a good candidate. But, now I'm sitting slightly older. I sort of look back and I'm like, well, would you have enjoyed it more if you didn't hammer yourself? And maybe then you make, obviously I never made, I left as senior consultant, but, made the next grade at 2 years or 2.5 years. And I think that for me was a massive mistake. And I think the other mistake I made, and I think part of this is a maturity thing, like, 30-year-old Nick is very different from 25-year-old Nick. But I'll always remember I was working with one client and they had an IT program that was going absolutely Pete-tong. And I remember having breakfast with the CEO, and for various reasons I won't go into, I didn't tell him. And he probably knew anyway, but I didn't say. And there was part of me that now, it's one of the big things I do with my clients is, I think there is obviously, you always, if you're giving someone feedback, you always do want to be mindful of the situation and the client. But the thing I find time and time again with our clients now at Create Engage is, they're hiring you for a reason, and it's not to just sort of be polite to them and tell them they're great. Otherwise, they wouldn't need you. And I always look back on that, and I doubt, I'm probably like most people, I overanalyze things. I doubt that would have changed anything. I doubt I would have gone, or they would have gone, wow, you've told us this is going wrong. You probably would have told me to bugger off and, stick my nose in my own business. But it's those little things. You're like, maybe that should have, and that, that shame. I don't say it was a mistake. I had no bearing on what was going on, but it's those little things I think stick with you. I'm sure it's the same for everyone. But those are the big ones, mate. I think from consulting at least.
No, I'm sure lots of people listening there'll be things there that they've been in that situation before. And I think it's part of maturing and the entrepreneurial journey. If you're in that situation now, I don't think you'd be afraid to say what you think and have those strong opinions. And
so you still do. And I think this is one thing. This was massive. People often ask me, and I think it's one of the listener questions coming up, so I'll preempt it, is, what do you get from the podcast? What are the things that have stuck with you? And I always remember Tim Smeaton over at Kubrick. And so I was there with Tim and Simon, and they're awesome entrepreneurs. They've done amazing things. And actually, I was like, these guys must know everything. And I remember his sort of point was, well, even though you know the mistakes, you still keep making them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that for me was like a real light bulb moment. Because I think one of the things about, in consulting is because I was trying to climb so fast, I must get everything perfect. And it's like, you'd beat yourself up if you didn't. And actually, you're not perfect, and everyone makes mistakes. And like, I'm sure I'll keep making mistakes, and other people will. And I think that's the big thing. So you're right. I now with our clients, I'm much more comfortable delivering that sort of, in consulting terms, difficult message. But
that's part of the appeal, right? I guess if there was a criticism of consultancies, often people feel like they're telling you a certain message, and I think that we find with some of the best consultancies, and I know from working with you in Create Engage, that what's great is it's a real genuine relationship where you will tell us your opinions, and we may disagree on certain stuff, but it's thought out, it's considered, and actually it's that honesty that I think clients particularly sort of appreciate. Okay, I'm keen to move on to the next part of our conversation.
I'm a talker, Mitra, so.
I'd really like to get onto building businesses, and I think there are lots of people listening that you want to have great advice for, people that are thinking of going down that route themselves. So let's talk about your latest venture, Create Engage, which is, I am full disclosure, a client of.
We are sitting in your house with your podcast kit.
Indeed. And we've been greatly appreciative of all the support you've given us so far. So I'm a big fan, but for our listeners, where did the idea for Create Engage come from? And how did you kind of approach launching and growing this new business?
So it's very kind of you to ask, mate. I don't want this to be the Create Engage show, so I will keep it very brief, because it isn't. The podcast, and I'm sure we'll talk about where the podcast came from. The podcast was always and is something to give people advice, and the business largely came from that. And the idea was really from those conversations with my guests of speaking to people, doing a podcast, thinking, well, what is a podcast? Why are you doing this? How and the world has moved on so much in terms of digital and in terms of when I'm now 30, so I got Facebook at 17, and I remember that was sort of just after Facebook had been released to anyone. Do you remember when it was still university students only?
Yeah.
So
I was taking a gap year, so I wasn't allowed to be on Facebook, and half my friends were.
And you missed out. You're
so frustrating.
And it's like MySpace. And that's I didn't have MySpace, but that was again. We now have younger relatives, and there is nothing that makes you feel older than talking about old like games consoles or old
Bebo. Yeah.
Also, the one for me is about 2 years ago, as like a bit of a fun Christmas present. My wife used to play PlayStation, and we're talking when you were kids, and so I went to one of these old retro games places and bought her a PlayStation. Now the crazy thing is two for one. Try and show anyone under about 18 a PlayStation. And in fact, the saddest thing, I went to, have you ever been to the Museum of Childhood in Bethnal Green?
No.
So go, it's great. It's childhood through the ages. It's great except for the fact that there is a technology section where you will see an Xbox that you and I probably, for sleepovers with your friends played Halo on, behind a glass screen with one of those little plaques in front of, like the sort of Roman
gathering
coins.
dust.
Exactly, mate. There's nothing that makes you feel older, and I'm sure, people older than us would say this, nothing makes you feel older than the thing you played with as a kid behind a glass screen. But for me, there's a whole few things that came together. But in essence, I had learned a lot of this from my time in a estate agency. So I'd always had a marketing sort of side to me. I think I just didn't know it was called marketing, because in consulting, at least sort of way back when, marketing wasn't something consultants did. Consultants did BD, and there was a marketing team. So if you wanted to be a consulting person, you didn't do marketing, you did BD. So I saw it as BD, and I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed meeting people, I enjoyed running events, but all of it's marketing. It's all just getting someone in the marketing funnel and building that relationship to a sale. And I'd done that in my consulting time. I then had, with the estate agency, my eyes had just been blown wide open, because suddenly I was marketing to, Joe Public and getting leads. I always remember the first lead I got from my estate agency, and I was like, this is crazy. Some woman I don't know has emailed me for a meeting while I'm watching a film on my sofa. Like, what is going on with the world? This is crazy. But that also showed me, I was like, I've just come from this industry where so many bright people work, and they are bright, and consultants are some of the best people at what they do you'll meet. But no one knew what a Facebook ad was. And I was like, why are we not doing this? So that was always in the back of my mind. And then through launching the podcast, growing the podcast, and just trying things, launching a podcast, growing a following, growing an audience, going out to guests, I was sort of all the time building that knowledge and understanding. I was like, well, this can help with this. I'm seeing it, because starting the podcast as well was a great sandbox. It was like running your own business, but if it doesn't go wrong, no one cares, because it doesn't cost a lot to do. And if it doesn't work, all you do is pack up the kit. And that was my thinking at the time. And so long, I'm sure we come back to the podcast, but the business was very much, I'd spoken to enough people. And I think to that point, you made around mistakes. One of the problems I'd had at the estate agency was I thought I had a great idea, and anyone who thought it was a bad idea was just an idiot. And that was, that was my starting point, is logically it works. And this is the thing I now, and I don't know, if you probably come across this as well, you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. So the thing I always try and challenge entrepreneurs with is your idea good? And I remember, and I'm sure he won't mind me saying this actually, I met Dom sort of way back through a mutual friend. Dom Morehouse, yeah. So guest number 2 as well. And I remember telling him the idea, and Dom was very much, this is a rubbish idea, it's not going to work for these reasons. And at the time I was like, nope, he failed the idiot test, he doesn't think it's a good idea. And just plowed on. That's not sort of to focus on Dom, but it's to say, anyone who said it was a bad idea, for me, was an idiot. It wasn't, and with hindsight, no, Dom was completely right. And the difference here, I was like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not just going to plow into something because I think it's right. And, I think the world to that point around this social media, I think where the world's gone, you hear a lot of stories about entrepreneurs who just created a thing and then made billions of pounds. And actually, when you dig into a lot of these super successful tech entrepreneurs, I'm treading into a space I know less about. I know, you deal with these guys day in, day out, so you know them much better. But most of the ones who you see having a massive success have got a huge backstory. You can probably count on one hand those who have come into it and just flown. It literally is one hand. But I think all of the stories in the media are presented like that. And actually, so that for me was a massive learning of, right, well, I've failed there. This is what I've learned. How do I change that? And so the idea came from the need, because I think the biggest thing I've seen with Create Engage is, and it's still early days, mate. The business has only been going 8 months, maybe 9 months, is starting with that need. So the idea came from speaking to people like you, where I was like, well, Mitty, and for those who don't know, we met through my podcast, so speaking to people like you, where I'm talking, going, well, I can help you set up a podcast and you will have to pay me for it. And you going, yeah, that sounds like a sensible thing. If I'd come to speak to you and speak to a number of other people and they'd gone, I'm not paying you to do that, well, I would have gone back to the drawing board. But for me, it was that. And then the big difference between that and the estate agency was equally starting small. So my view was, instead of going, and again, big mistake with the estate agency, and again, a bigger mistake I tell people not to do now with their own business, or even, if you're building a consulting practice or just a consulting offering, investing tons of cash up front in like a new website, a new brand, before you know what's going on.
Yeah, it's a common mistake. Yeah.
And that for me, so I was like, right, let's do this really lean. Let's do it really simple. Let's put a lot of thought into it. Don't get me wrong. A ton of thought has gone into the Create Engage proposition, into the services we offer and how we help our clients. And there is a genuine need there. And we are serving that in a way that helps our clients. And also that's evolved, where the business was when I talked to you even 6-7 months ago, even 8, it's probably,
yeah, it's probably never 8.
Time flies, mate. The business is a completely different business now. Now, we still do quite a few of the same things, but just the way we work with our clients, the structure we've put around it, because it all helps our clients. If we have clear processes and a roadmap for where they're going to go, because our clients are consultants, so I, to an extent, know how consultants think because I've been there.
Which is very reassuring for consulting clients, so it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and that's the other thing, right, is I love to
And you weren't an estate agent, so...
Well, but it's a serious point, that other thing of you really need to respect. When I said it earlier, and it wasn't, I don't think it came across, but it was never to say estate agency is an easy industry, because it's not. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they think I can see an industry from the outside and go on the inside. And so many industries are different on the inside than they are on the outside.
Yeah.
And you must have the same with recruitment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you alluded to those tech entrepreneurs, the few that create those businesses. But one thing that you've, I think, got in common with them, not to say we're quite there yet in terms of creating a unicorn.
Well, mate, I'm making more profit than most unicorns.
Well, that's true.
I don't know if that's
controversial. Another conversation. But
Well,
this is the thing. I think all of those people, they were solving a genuine problem that needed to be solved, and they went for it. But also, they had predominantly, they had some sort of backstory. Yeah. They got the industry. They knew that it was the right time to go for it, and then they backed themselves, and they had the resilience and all the other qualities you need to become, Bill Gates or whatever. But that's very important, and it kind of brings me on to sort of my next question around that. You saw the gap in the market, you went for it. How do you feel that, I guess, the digital marketing landscape for consulting has changed? Because clearly you spotted something that needed disrupting, and I guess since you set up the podcast, I guess over the last 12 months, things will be evolving all the time given social media. And so it would be good to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and my danger here is I've got no oracle, and I know Gary V. My podcast has I get about 700 listeners an episode. We've got a lot less, but we've got people who are caring enough to listen to us now, which I still find quite amazing. And I think what we are doing here is one of the biggest changes. So the thing that led me to realize there is a world out there that most consulting firms aren't exploiting is twofold. One, our industry is massively fracturing. So over the last 10, 20 years, I go, well, actually, let's say as long as I've been in the industry, because that's all I can speak to, the last 7 or 8 years, when I joined, there were probably the big 4 and maybe 5 sort of boutiques, and you'll tell me this is nonsense, and then like a few tiny firms, but there was not what there is now, which I think is a much bigger, serious middle layer of firms. And so the fracturing industry is one thing, and all of these firms who have started because they are great at what they do and they've got great networks, they build a great business. And the thing in consulting is you don't need a huge client pool to have a huge business. If you can get a client that's £1 million over a year, it's not inconceivable for many projects. 10 clients makes you a £10 million business. And, to your point around unicorns, most unicorns are losing 50 to 500 million pounds a year. So you're doing all right. So that was the one side is the industry was there. And actually these firms who were growing have grown and are continuing to grow, but realize that they need to do something different. The other side was actually having done it as an estate agent and spent, for me at the time, a ton of cash, but for most consulting firms, barely any cash. I think at the time, I remember putting like £2,000 on Facebook ads and being like, wow, gosh, this is most of my money. And actually, for most consulting firms, that's half a table at the rugby or 2 tickets. It depends where you go, which game at sort of at Twickenham you go to. And so that for me was a massive disconnect. I was like, well, hang on, you're spending this on rugby or you're spending this on a conference. Conferences are like £15,000. And I was like, well, we can do this. And this was where I think with the podcast, I knew I'd spend, call it £1,000 on kit, tops. And I was doing all of this and doing it really low cost because I was doing some of the editing myself, some of the design myself, but keeping it really lean. And it's worth saying, much as you've sort of seen the inside of what we do, there's a lot more to it. And if you're doing a corporate podcast, let's say, I wouldn't wing it. I've seen people wing it. It doesn't work. Either do it properly internally or get someone else to do it. And that's not just a sales pitch. Don't come to me, go somewhere else, but do it properly. But if you're doing this on your own and you're listening to this and you want to do a podcast, just go and do it. It's very easy. You can do it with an iPhone. I mean, we've got your backup recorder here is sort of, what's that, 70 quid? Yeah. That will do you as a microphone. So for all of those reasons, I was like, the cost of this stuff's massively coming down and the need for it's massively going up. So actually, in terms of where the digital marketing world's changed, well, the platforms haven't changed hugely, although they have, and I'll come on to that, but actually just the cost of execution and the efficiency. So if you are, even 3 years ago, LinkedIn wasn't really a platform, it was a CV repository. People like yourself would go there to tap people up for jobs. Now it's a social network. And I think almost too much so. Soon, I think right now we are in the sort of perfect storm of LinkedIn. And we were talking about this over dinner, weren't we? I think in 2-3 years, and it might be longer because the B2B world moves slightly slower than the B2C world, it might be 5 years. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a new player who is taking that sort of discerning professional, because you're already seeing it on LinkedIn. I'm sure you see them as well. You get people who just basically post cat videos.
Oleg. Yeah, there's I think the CTO of Daily Mail.
Well, and he does it very cleverly. But even so, there are videos you see, because some people have worked out that silly videos get tons of likes and views. So you'll see some videos that get like millions of views because someone's just fallen off a ladder, or not in a bad way, in like a funny way, or they've tripped up. It's those sort of Facebook videos, and so someone's worked that out, and so you see them more and more. But what people forget is, firstly, that does nothing for your profile.
Devalues the proposition.
Exactly. And yes, it spikes, but the spike moves. I had that, I don't know if we can talk about it, but I had a blog all about how I've stopped drinking. And that went crazy. And crazy for me was like 14,000 views. And you see that spike, and you see the spike disappear. And the reason was, I'm not running an alcohol-free business. People will come to you, and that's amazing. But if you're not selling the thing you're telling them about, where's the benefit? Like the podcast. Last year, when I was doing many more episodes, I got a few people come to me. But now I'm doing Create Engage. I get, on a regular basis, people coming to me for work and for conversations because of the podcast. So there's that alignment. So the big change has been, it's cheaper to do. More people are there. And so suddenly the return on investment and the business case is massively skewed in favor of digital. So you could go and have 10 coffees and that'll take you 2 days. Or you could create a really good bit of content and you can push that out. Now, that's what the landscape's changed. In terms of actually the tactics, blogging can still work. White papers can still work. It's the thought that goes into them. And it's ensuring they are part of a more holistic strategy. You know as well as I do the power of podcasting. And I'm sitting there thinking, in fact, I was speaking to a partner of a consulting firm today of, you've got a great firm, you've got so many experts and so many nice people. Why aren't you doing this?
Yeah.
And actually, that's the big change. So I think the real shift has been the people at the head, the front of the industry. You look at the likes of 11FS. Mm-hmm. They are pushing out podcasts and video content almost over their written content.
For sure.
And they are doing it at a frequency that no one's matching. And when you are, particularly if you're an innovation or you're a digital consultancy, you're trying to promote that side of your business, it's hard to say you're a digital transformation specialist when all of your thought leadership is really bland white papers.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think there are there is evolving online in your marketing to attract more business. But another critical part for consultancies is attracting talent. And that's another, for me, a huge part of what you're doing, which I think will help your clients totally kind of, I guess, get one up on their competitors, because we see it, the way that the young professional in consulting is evolving. They want to really understand what they're getting. They are very discerning. They will have multiple options. And actually what they want to understand is what is the culture like? What are the values like? But not just hear the kind of the party line. They want to see it. They want to believe it. They want to, and the best way you can demonstrate that is from, creative marketing, opening up your business and doing innovative things like podcasts and videos and events.
Completely, mate. And the interesting thing as well is, and I feel slightly torn given what you do, because there are two parts. There's one which is you can make your recruiters' lives easier. And, I'm sure, I know other recruiters you might as well have shared interviews that I've done with prospective candidates.
I do every time that you've interviewed one of our clients, I'll share that before they go for an interview. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And, so for that side, instantly it puts that firm ahead. And actually, and this is where I'm sorry, mate, it's less for you, but if you've got a great recruitment presence and you're on social media doing it, people will see you as a firm. And actually, firstly, that makes you cool and more of a firm they want to work for. But equally, then people come to you for jobs. And so, you know what the fees are in terms of recruitment. You can quickly save yourself a lot of money doing that. And now that's, I say I'm torn because I want you to get all of them right, mate. But,
no, it's very true. I mean, at the end of the day, I think a lot of the very best consultancies out there get a lot of direct applications. They get referrals from the colleagues, and I totally agree. If you get your marketing right, it will probably make our lives a little harder. There are other ways we can add value though, but no, your point is completely valid. Great. No, that's really fascinating. And I've seen it from having recruited into the consulting space for 10 years, the evolution of marketing. It hasn't been that pronounced. You really have, it is a lot of the same white papers and a lot of the same odd stuff. And it's really only in the last sort of 12 months we've started to see, and it is new entrants disrupting. And 11FS, to give them a shout out, that what they've done is truly impressive, and I think it gets everyone to raise their game a little bit. And I know for a fact, since you set up Create Engage, there's definitely a lot of people interested in changing this up, and it comes from the top. But I think also the best companies out there are listening to their staff and listening to their young employees that are coming through the ranks about what they want to see and the sort of business they want to be a part of. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time.
Well, and it's completely right. And I think it's worth, the thing that's also worth saying is the white papers still work if you put the thought into them. And I think that's the struggle. We've worked with clients to create white papers and they've been very good and they've won business for them. But I always call what we do with clients ebooks. And the simple reason being, I always think of white paper as what I see in the industry, where it doesn't talk to anyone, it doesn't help anyone, it's just to look at us because we're clever. Whereas the reason I say ebook is really just to distinguish it. But by giving value in content, you will get rewarded. And that's whichever medium you do. But you're spot on. The evolution of the likes of 11FS are raising people's games. What I hope we're doing with our clients is we're helping them improve their marketing. So their competitors will be looking and going, well, they're winning work because of all this stuff. They're doing this. Where are we? And you're right. Where I think it's interesting, that point you make around the last 10 years haven't moved, I think we're in a seismic shift for the next 3 to 5 years. And, nothing, just like the technology we've got here, the fact your phone, you can shoot in 4K on this, that you used to need a sort of £5,000 film crew to do what you can now do on your phone in your study, in your office. And that's where we're going to see this shift. So it's, obviously I would say this, I'm selling it, but I think people have got away with it up to now. And I think we're only going to see that difference get more pronounced, like you say.
Totally. We've got another listener question here.
Very good.
And it's very much linked to that, I guess, linked to the return on investment if you get your marketing right as a consultancy. So we can look at this from a consulting angle, but also from your own.
Okay.
So how do you get clients initially? So for Create Engage, especially if you've been working for a company and may not have broadly networked sort of individually. So interested in your take from a Create Engage perspective, but also perhaps for any consultancies out there thinking about their BD strategy.
Yeah. So, well, let me take the consulting side first. And fundamentally, I think if you haven't got a network, the first thing I say is go and get one. And that's not going to help. I'm sure the person who asked this is like, that's not the bloody answer, Nick. I want to know the right app. And I'll come on to that because I would say I've not added it up, but I think only one of our clients has come through my network. I think everyone else, including yourself, have come through digital marketing, and I include the podcast there. So you and I did not know each other before we started the podcast. You had and this isn't to put you down, you probably had no interest in who I was. You didn't know who I was. But because of the podcast, that got you interested in what I was doing. We had a conversation and, become great friends off the back of it. But the reason to highlight that is I would say probably 3 clients fit into that space. An equal percentage have come from our digital marketing. So I'll come on to that because, if I just sat here and said all of our clients in my network, sort of, it's on shaky ground selling digital marketing. But the great thing for me is they are not. Fundamentally, our biggest clients have come straight through digital marketing and we did not know them. Just signed some of our biggest contracts last month. We did not know the firms, so that side works.
It works.
It works. Yeah, I've got that. To the network piece though, I think, you know this, and I always say to you, mate, you are a much, much better networker than I am, is go and build one. I think again, it's that point, isn't it, around putting entrepreneurs on a pedestal. So many people look at people with great networks and think they just appeared on earth with this like network of 1,000 people they know. And that's just a complete myth. I came into the city, for want of a better word, knowing our family friend who worked at the FSA. And, I was lucky. She worked there. She told me about the job. It was a complete normal graduate scheme. There was no like favors. None of these things have been like sort of, jobs for the boys type stuff. That was the only person I knew. And then it was just a case of getting to know people. And you're the same. I think you go into a graduate job and you're told about networking and, building rapport. Don't do any of that rubbish. Go and meet some people. And if you get on and you think they're interesting, keep meeting them. And exactly to that, if you haven't got a network, before you even go out, go and meet some people.
Totally. And ask questions. I mean, It's about being intellectually curious and looking to add some value or just learn. And I think you'll find it's amazing how many people just are afraid to ask questions or just put themselves out there. And I think, you really see a difference once you start sort of switching that mindset.
Exactly. And, it's that network. It's called a network effect for a reason. The 5 degrees of separation. I mean, we could get to anyone we want in 5 people, and it's true. And I'm not going to do it here, but I'm sure we could. And that's how it works. You meet someone who knows someone, and because you're doing something, you say, let's have a chat. And so that would be the first thing, is if you're looking to go and do a business, and again, I'm giving all of this advice with the couch that I've been doing Create Engage for like 8 months. I'm not an uber successful entrepreneur. I'm not sort of Elon Musk or Don Morehouse or James Mitra here. I go and meet people because you're always going to do better with more, not less. I think then the other side, in terms of if you've not got a client base or a network, and this comes to the marketing, is you need to know who you're selling to. So if you are going to go out cold, and never do it off the bat, always do it while you're still working. There's Gary Vaynerchuk, by the way. If you're not following him, follow him. And his great advice is just, you need to do stuff on the side, and you do. And so start small, start on the side, but spend time really focusing on who you're selling to. It's the number one thing we work with all of our clients on, is who are you selling your product to? Because if you don't know that, you can't build a product and message around it that anyone cares about. And always, when you're doing that, focus on a niche. You have built a really successful business on a niche. I'm building a business on a niche. Anytime you broaden that out and think, and I get it, I did it with the estate agency. We were a whole London estate agency because I said, there's 8 million people in London. I need 50 of them. It's easier to get 50 out of 8 million than it is out of 100,000. It's wrong. You're much more likely to be the go-to person for that tiny group than you are a bland noise in 8 million. And it's the same with any business. So that's if you were going out solo, go and get a network. But in the meantime, get really hot on who you're selling to, why they care about your product and how it helps them. I think so many people start a business the other way. I did, I didn't care about a estate agency. I wanted to make money. And so I figured, what's the easiest route to that? By starting Create Engage the other way around and saying, where is, like you said, product market fit, where is there a real market need? How can I give a product that does that? I think it's a Jim Rohn quote of give people, the quickest way to get what you want is help others get what they want. I might have butchered that, but that is the fundamental. So there you go. Help others get what they want, and you will be successful.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of wisdom in that, and it brings me on to another listener question. Actually, it's slightly more specific, but it plays into this. So, if someone's been made redundant and they want to build a consulting business off the back of it, but they don't have the cash flow, what sort of 3 pieces of advice would you give them to kind of get started? I guess quite a challenging situation. I wouldn't want to be in it, but
I was going to say, I feel at risk of answering questions I have no qualification to. I run a podcast. I don't. That is.
But perhaps from your experience of interviewing some of the best leaders in the industry.
I like the phrase. Well, actually, mate, I'll give it from my own scenario, which was I was staring at my bank account, having run my estate agency business, thinking, how am I going to pay our rent next month? And the simple answer to the question is go and find the quickest income you can as quickly as possible. So if you are in that position, don't go and build a consulting business, go contracting, or if you have a friend in a consulting firm, go and do that. That is the simplest answer I'd give, is just go contract. But obviously that assumes, I was very fortunate. Can't remember. I think it was actually, to networks. I dropped a speculative email to someone I knew who said, oh, I know someone in our firm who might need a contractor. And it was like, yes. And that was actually, no, sorry, that wasn't it. That's a lie. I don't want to lie. Actually, that was the second one. The first one was, I was very lucky. A friend of mine who runs a consulting firm, I sort of reached out to him and was like, actually, I've got a bit of a problem. Do you have anything? And at the time they were like, well, we got this thing that's quite low paid. We don't know how long it'll last, but do you want to come in? And, amazing. And they were fantastic about it. And without that, I don't know what I would have done. And that was brilliant. So that's the thing, though, is
leveraging the network.
But frankly, don't go and start there's not 3 bits of advice. There's one. Go and get some money, because, the thing that comes with having that money and that income is the time to experiment with things. If you're there scratching around to find any job, stop trying to start a business.
Well, let's say someone has got through that first few months. They've got their first client under their belt, hoping to be the next big consulting firm. And this is the add-on from the listener's question. What would that person do to ensure that first year was a success? What would be the
Mate, again,
couple of things?
I feel maybe we should get you on the show. I feel I've not been going a year, so I cannot comment on that. But I think it's going to be a really cringy cliche answer. But I think whatever you're doing, are you happy? And I think it comes back to what we talked about, way back around consulting. Is I see people who love consulting, and I always remember I'm never sure on name checking people on this, but people who know me will know who he is. There was a senior partner I worked for who I was always really jealous of, because I've never seen anyone who enjoys consulting more. And, they loved it. He lived for it and he loves it and he's really good at it. And actually, for me, that's the perfect thing. I know so many consultants, I'm sure you speak to them day in, day out, who hate it. I always remember I was on because you get the train, you've not done it, but you get the train back on a Thursday. I always remember, it's weird how things stick with you. There was a guy, didn't know him, different firm, sitting behind me, chewing his mate's ear off about how shit the client was and how shit the work was and how much he hated the client and how much the partner was a dick. And I just remember, and at the time, I was in consulting, I just remember thinking, what are you doing, mate? And that's where I say, what does success look like? You're enjoying it and you're happy. And actually, the financial side, obviously if you've got certain aspirations and ambitions, if you're not achieving those, that will make you unhappy. But start there. If you've started a consulting firm and you hate it, go and do something else. And again, I mean, I'm sure you tell people this. I don't think being an entrepreneur, I don't like the term. I'm not some special human being. Like, I'm just a bloke who does something slightly different to someone else. I don't think it's for everyone. It's just like saying, consulting is not for everyone.
Yeah, I think a lot of people pretend like you have to do these things and it's a badge of honor, but it actually really isn't for everyone.
Well, and it's the same with consulting. I tell, as I said, every sort of young person I know, I don't know that many, but if someone asks, consulting is an amazing career for as long as you want it to be. And the trick is to know where on that roller coaster you are going to get off. Are you, roller coaster is a terrible metaphor, you can't get off. Bus is a much better metaphor. Can you get off the bus? Do you want to get off the bus at manager, senior manager, director, partner? The people who struggle, and I was there to an extent for the time sort of before I left. I think if you're doing it and you're unhappy and you don't enjoy it, what are you doing? I won't name her because she hasn't approved her episode, but I recorded an episode with a fantastic female partner of a consulting firm who shared a bit of advice that she was given by a senior partner, so it's secondhand. But she said, what's being a partner like? And the partner said, well, it's sort of like winning a burger eating contest, but the prize is more burgers.
That's good.
And I sort of, and that really put it into perspective for me, because I think it's very easy to look up at the partners and go, whatever your firm is, and go, these guys or girls have got something. You get there and it's like, it's like this sort of film, isn't it? The gates open, it's like Garden of Eden on the other side, and actually, there's perks, but it's the same job. It's a different flavour, and that was the point. I was like, for happiness, if you're eating burgers and you don't want to eat another year of burgers, go and change a thing.
Yeah, indeed. No, great advice.
I feel like with all these listener questions, I'm just dodging them again. I'm not answering that. Do this.
No. I think that's good advice. And I think to some of the other things you talked about, knowing your niche, finding your gap in the market, truly having a clear mission and vision. If you're selling the sort of work that you're passionate about, you're likely to have a successful year if you put in the time and hire, create, engage to do your marketing. That's
well, and the thing is, and I say this in sort of sales meetings as well. You do not need to hire us. This is not, nor should it be a sales pitch for us. You can do everything we do with you and have done with you yourselves. But if you want to get there much faster, or you want to avoid all the mistakes, or you simply don't want to do it, that's where we help. It's just like a consulting firm.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we've touched a bit about Create Engage, and obviously we have alluded to the fact that we met through this podcast.
We did, yeah.
And it's been going for almost 2 years. So congratulations on that.
It's weird, isn't it? It's crazy.
No, it's an amazing achievement. So let's talk a bit about the learnings from that. I've been an avid listener. Why did you set it up in the first place? And what advice would you have for anyone listening and having listened to your podcast and then reached out to you about setting up a podcast? I'm sure there are lots of other people who feel similar. So talk us through that and what advice you'd give to people in that situation.
Well, advice to people setting their own
looking to.
Yeah, well, definitely. So actually a listener of mine, I will shout out because she won't mind, Peter Killian, who has asked questions, is a very keen listener, massive supporter. So thank you, Peter. She is launching her own podcast. I hope that's allowed to be said. I don't think this will be the live one. We haven't got all that many viewers, so don't worry too much right now. But I think her podcast, if it's not gone out, will have after this. So
brilliant.
Peter, I will put a link in the show if it has. But that's just to show listeners do reach out, and where I can, I help people. So the podcast came from me. We talked about sort of that marketing side. And I think I went into contracting, and it was a great career for what I wanted at the time. It for me wasn't a long-term option. And I share, openly with people. I've done an episode about it and the pluses and minuses. And I think it's not all pluses. People see the money of contracting. Are like, of course, it's a brilliant career. There's downsides, and for me, it wasn't going to give me what I wanted. There's no career growth. You are a day rate contractor. You don't promote. And so I wanted to do something different. And the podcast, I was like, well, I love podcasts. I'm curious and I want to figure out how to do it as just more of a sort of interested perspective. And frankly, worst case, I get to speak to some amazing people. And the big thing I was missing actually in contracting at the time was I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any guides, and we've talked a lot about mentorship before. And actually, I wanted that. So rather selfishly, my thought process was, and a bit to that Jim Rohn quote of, well, if I'm putting out interviews from really experienced people in our industry, so I'm helping them, I'm helping the listeners, and heck, I get to have a 2-hour conversation with, the likes of, and at the time, my first guests, Matt Chung, Don Morehouse, Adrian Betteridge, Minesh Jobanputra, these people, I was like, you do amazing things. I'd love to learn from you. And I get 2 hours of your time to, within reason, ask you whatever I want. There's no downside. So that was the sort of thought process behind it. And it really grew from there. I thought no one will listen and we'll shut it. And I've had a few good conversations. And actually, very quickly, people were listening. And I don't pretend it's sort of life-changing. And well, it has changed my life. I'm no Tim Ferriss or Joe Rogan. I'm never going to retire off it. I don't make any money. Sponsorship is available if you'd like. But just the massive networking benefits and what it's led to. I don't make any money off the podcast, but I have made quite a bit of money off the things that have come from the podcast through the business. So that's the first thing, right? Is, for anyone, that was why I did it. And for anyone thinking of doing it, go and do it. I was speaking to a friend of mine who, he loves songwriting, really niche, but niche is good. The thing with the world now is 10 years ago, media was mass media. So you had to be mass media, it had to be bland. It had to be big. Everyone had to like it. Now there are communities for everything.
Completely.
We're in here. There's communities for interior design. There's communities for niche sports. Ultimate frisbee. I don't want to offend anyone, and I don't know if people still play it.
Very impressive.
Yeah,
I've seen it on
have you ever tried it?
No, I've seen people do it. It's a lot more. There's a lot of exertion goes on. I see some incredible catches on the internet.
It's one of those sports that I remember at university, sort of, because it had ultimate and you thought it sounded a bit silly, and actually you try. And it's intense. It's like shuttle runs, mate. It's shuttle runs with a frisbee. But then, the point was more, there's communities for all of these things. And so a friend of mine was like, I like songwriting. I might start a podcast. And it's a no-brainer. If you want to get into any industry, to that person who said, how do I get a network? Because you will instantly meet all of the biggest players in your industry, because who doesn't want to get interviewed? And your network instantly grows. I can't even remember who it was, but it was in one of these. So I'm a big reader, as you probably know, and it was one of these sort of ancient self-help books. It might have been How to Win Friends and Influence People. It might have been Magic of Thinking Big, but they're like 100 years old. And they were talking about some violin player who was famous, can't remember his name. And all he did was write letters to famous violin players and say, I like your stuff, can I have a chat? And that was it. And actually, that is exactly what a podcast is. So if you want to learn about one of your industries, whatever your industry is, or whatever your hobby is, it doesn't have to be work related, go and interview people. So that's the yes, do it. And in terms of how, I guess it comes back to the marketing thing a little bit, mate, is figure out who you want to speak to. Why, like some of the things we talked about with 40 Minute Mentor, why are you doing a podcast? Because a podcast that's just stuff about stuff is never going to be interesting. But a podcast that's got a niche and a purpose and a goal and an audience that buy into that is powerful. And like I say, that doesn't have to be an audience about consulting or about entrepreneurship or mentorship, but an audience about ultimate frisbee. I don't know if there's not. Is there a?
Wow.
We'll look after this,
yeah.
right? I don't know if there is an ultimate frisbee podcast. It's one of our clients. We helped them launch the first podcast for the water industry.
Oh, wow.
And water industry people like to hear about other water industry people. Would you go and listen to it? I don't know, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
No, definitely. And I think we've found from launching it, it's a real point of difference. And to your point, from a networking standpoint, it's incredible. But just from a learning, the opportunity to talk to super smart people about interesting things that you share an interest in is a unique thing to do. So yeah, I concur. Anyone that's thinking about doing it, go for it. And to that point, you've had a lot of fantastic conversations with some amazing people. I've listened to the vast majority of climbing consulting podcasts. But are there any, it's going to be a difficult question for you because I know you don't have favorites, but what are the kind of 3 top pieces of advice or wisdom that have come from those interviews? And this is another listener question.
We should have a bell, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
The listener bell. I got an empty beer can. And you're right. The first thing to say is anything I'm about to say is not saying that there are guests better than others. And actually, when I say that, people think it's such a politician's answer. But ultimately, guests that I really related with will be because of my story. And there are guests who actually, there's guests I say, I loved that interview. And some of my listeners say, I wasn't that fussed about that, actually. They didn't sort of press my buttons. And so that's the first caveat. But there's a few things, I guess. What did you say? 2, 3, some?
Let's go for 3 little pieces of wisdom.
Three pieces of wisdom. That's a lot of wisdom. Listen to the whole show. So I think in terms of, if I think the ones that have, the real light bulb moments for me, and this is 3, there were more, but just the things that I guess have had a tangible impact in terms of changing my actual behavior. First one, Don Morehouse, whoever has the most stories wins.
Yeah.
I went and climbed Mount Snowdon last year, and I know it's Mount Snowdon, it's not huge, but we went 4 hours to Wales, climb Mount Snowdon, because I was like, I need more stories. Let's go get a story. And it was great, and there's the go and do it. There's then the awesome little trampoline park under the mountain. Really cool. That was directly because I was listening to Dom and I was like, yeah, I don't think I've got many stories lined up.
Yeah, and I've met Dom and I remember him saying that, and I've used that almost every month of the year to telling people and do my best to try and create stories too. So that's a very good one.
Well, it's a great piece of advice because so often, to our point around slipping into that sort of lifestyle, you can slip into a lifestyle of holidays, and there's nothing, I love holidays, but you go on the same holiday and you sit by a pool and actually, why not go do something more adventurous? Last year there was a company doing an ice rally across Mongolia. I couldn't get anyone to sign up. If you're up for it, they'll do similar next year. I'm not going to hold you to it, mate. But so that was the first. I think the second, and it's a bit of a cop-out because I don't think he actually said it on the podcast, but I'll take it, is Bronick's advice of consulting will still be there. because that was, that was game changing, led me to the interview, and actually go back and listen to the whole thing. Just there's so much in there. And it was then that piece that I mentioned before around Tim Smeaton is, that for me was a light bulb, because I think, and just as a refresher, that sort of, I know what I meant to do and I still make the same mistake. I think so often we sort of think you should learn and always improve. And I think the great thing about where we are now is technology's helping us and we are improving, and there's a big focus on personal improvement. But I think that comes with that fear of, if I've not done my 10,000 steps, I'm a failure. And I certainly had that. And in consulting, I think the big thing, and I didn't mention it with consulting, but I should, because it's a massive thing and hopefully helps other young people. I wouldn't say I'm young anymore, but I think when I was a consultant, I was always focused on making sure everyone liked me and I always came across in the best way. And so I always internalized, if someone was being a bit of an idiot or was being off with me, it was me. I wasn't approaching them right. Now I've realized, no, some people either you just don't get on with, or some people have bad days, and actually you don't know what's going on in someone's home life. You don't know if they had an argument with their partner, or if they broke down that morning, whatever it is. And actually, it took me a long time to learn that. And that, to me, really feeds into that point of, you're still going to make some mistakes, and some people still aren't going to like you. But are you going to spend all of your time worrying about your mistakes? I'm sure someone will listen back to this podcast and be like, oh, I wish I'd said that. I didn't give the right answer. I didn't wear the right clothes. You can spend so long focusing on what went wrong. And that, for me, was a real learning curve, because I think I always thought, that was just something people did. So when Tim sat there, hugely impressive entrepreneur, really admiring what him and Simon are building, I was like, well, if this bloke still messes up, I should probably give myself some more credit. Again, it's what I was saying about when I first started in the city. I saw everyone, and again, because it's like 20, 30 years older than me, I was like, these guys are so impressive. I could never be here. I've got to be perfect. And you actually realize, look, everyone messes up. Even the guys at the top mess up.
Totally, yeah.
And we all do it on a daily basis. And actually, I think that holds a lot of people back for in all walks of life. You can make mistakes, and it doesn't matter. It's like when you're 16, you think whatever you're doing is going to be the biggest, or the end of, you have a bad whatever, and it's like, it's the end of the world.
Yeah, totally. And it's a bit like the imposter syndrome. I think it's very similar. There are probably a lot of people listening, and yourself and myself have your days when you just feel like, someone asks you your advice on something you don't feel qualified to give, a bit like tonight. But you do, because you've got great, incredible experience. And often, we suffer from that. But I totally agree. I think that's really good. So everyone should go back and listen to those podcasts.
Well, and that's where I say listen to them all. But
yeah.
I'm not. People like different guests. People like different people. People like listening to men, women, people from big firms, small firms, and much like you do, I think with your podcast really well. And it's worth saying as well. This isn't a sort of secret ad for Create Engage. While we do guide you on some things, you pick your guests. And so one of the things I think you've done really well is got a breadth of guest. And I think for a podcast of any series, that's the really important thing, is having that range. And so, that's where I say, listen to me. Obviously, go back and listen to all of them. But those are if someone was going to put me right on the spot, as you just did right now, those are my three pearls.
And I'm going to give you one more on the spot quick question. For those that are either novices and haven't really listened to many podcasts before, or those that are avid listeners, what are the kind of three that aren't your own that you love? And you don't need to say 40-minute mentor, but who are the people that run podcasts that inspire you and have played
Of course, the 40-minute mentor. Right? That was naturally. Really what. Yeah, that was
three others though.
Yeah. So I'm probably going to shatter a lot of illusions. So I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but I am very focused on a few. So the big one I grew up with was the Tim Ferriss Show. So I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan. I didn't mention, my origin story, that was the other big thing. I read the 4-Hour Workweek. And if you've not read the 4-Hour Workweek, go read it, and it will blow your mind. Stop after about the first half, because a lot of the things Tim talks about in terms of software and platforms are 10 years out of date. Half of them don't exist anymore. But as he says, why he hasn't done an updated one is the points he makes are so good. So go and listen to that. So I listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast, and I was like, I love that. I'm going to do my own. I listened to the Tony Robbins podcast, worth a listen to. If you want some real motivation really quickly, Gary Vaynerchuk. But equally, sort of, I think in danger of saying podcasts are all about just learning and education. House of Rugby is by far one of my go-to podcasts. And if, like I tend to, I'm late home on a train, so tomorrow, late train back to Bath, and I don't want to listen to an entrepreneur tell me his story when I'm shattered, I'm going to go and listen to, Mike Tyndall and James Haskell, and I can't say Alex Payne. I feel they will never hear this, but I feel bad leaving them out. Talking about rugby. So those would be my three. I think if you want to see where I got my inspiration from, Tim Ferriss. If you want to learn and be inspired, Tony Robbins and Gary Vaynerchuk. And if you want to have some fun, House of Rugby.
Great stuff. Thank you. We're getting towards the end of our conversation. But I wanted to come back to something that you alluded to earlier. And for those that can see this podcast recording, you have a San Miguel in front of you, but it's actually a 0% alcohol.
It is, yeah.
And I know that's been an important sort of change in your life over the last couple of years, giving up drink. I know you've also moved out of London.
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch upon that because I think anyone listening that will have got to know you will be interested in the whole you, and I think it's a really inspiring story. And you mentioned you'd written a blog about it that got a lot of warm support and a lot of interest. So can you just tell our listeners a bit about that part of your life?
Absolutely, and you're right. So the blog was written for no other reason than to help two friends who were in the same space. And I'd love to say I put keywords in and I did research. No, I wrote it for two people from the heart. And suddenly 14,000 people were reading it. And that, someone asked about what's changed in digital marketing. 14,000 people read a blog from some bloke they've never met because they thought it resonated with them. So there is what has changed in a nutshell. So the drink was very much something I should have done a lot sooner. And the thing with alcohol is it's such an ingrained part of society. And actually, when you say I've got a problem with alcohol, everyone thinks you're like a major alcoholic. I think 90% of people have a problem with alcohol. It's just socially acceptable. It's sort of, and this isn't like a society podcast, but drugs are bad. If someone goes and smokes weed or takes cocaine, and I'm not condoning that, it's illegal, you shouldn't do it. But the point is more, that's bad, but going and getting absolutely battered on a Friday night, falling down and, all of those sort of things, no one cares about. So that's just the sort of backdrop of it. But I think I'd come from a culture where I grew up drinking a lot because I played rugby and, you were probably, we talked about this on the train actually, so you probably were, when you're a kid, you're like, adults drink, I want to drink. And then at rugby clubs, people are there's always beer, there's always jugs, you have a little sip here, so you're drinking and you that was the culture. And actually, I quite have again, saying I have an addictive personality makes me sound crazy. Like I get really into things. And so I was like, well, drink's great, let's drink more. That's the more is better than less. With drink, it's not the case. And it was just more, there's no, and I was saying this in the blog, there's no backstory of I lost everything, was a raging alcoholic, or there's no backstory of, anything like that. It's not like a Russell Brand. It was just over time, I would drink too much. And I know that had a negative impact on certain things. And I think the hardest thing is actually socially, most people aren't going to turn around to you and say, you're being a knob because you drink too much, because everyone drinks. But there's a lot of people who, like me, actually are not great drunks. I wish I was one of those people. We've all got mates who are like that, who are just life and soul of the party after a few beers. For me, it's either I'm not that much fun to be around, or I throw up, or I go to sleep. None of those make for a good dinner companion. And it's worth saying as well, actually, because I'll fast forward, but I'll come back to it, is, I still don't drink, but I'll have, if it's a celebration, I'll have a glass of champagne. Or, very rarely I'll have a glass of whiskey, because I like the flavour. It's not the alcohol I want. So I went through a series of his weddings, actually. I too many weddings where I just fallen asleep or, made a fool of myself. I was like, this was sort of cool at 20. It was sort of okay at 25. I'm now touching 30, or I was 28 at the time. This is not cool. And I should have done it earlier. And, that's a massive thing to anyone, is if you're even thinking about giving up booze, go and try it. So I remember, how Facebook ads sort of learn about your life before you tell anyone, and I'm sure something will come out that are tracking our voice and our phones. But I kept getting ads for this 1 year no beer, which is a accountability program. So and it's worth saying I didn't sign up, but long story short, you sign up, they give you an accountability group, 1 year, no beer, transform your life. Simple. And I was like, well, they said you can try 3 months or a year. And I was like, well, a year sounds long, so I'll try 3 months. And the reason for that was I've done plenty of dry Januaries. I'm sure you've done it. Dry January is not drinking. Dry January is saving money. And it's really easy because everyone's doing it. So I sort of said, well, I'll do 3 months because you've got to do social occasions. And that's where I've always thought of myself as confident. But actually, with hindsight, I think part of drink, and I'm not alone here again, we've all been to these things. Drink is seen as an acceptable way of overcoming your social anxiety. We've all been to a wedding and it's really awkward until people have got a glass or two of Prosecco in them, and And so it's acceptable to, oh, we're nervous, let's go and down a couple of pints, we'll have fun. That is not the right way to live. And that's not, if people want to do it, that's fine. But why don't you get comfortable with that and then make the choice? So that was where the three, it sounds perfectly sensible you say it like that. And again, I have no judgment on people who drink. If you want to drink, that's entirely your choice. But I was like, right, I'll do 3 months. And so I had 3 months. There was like a family holiday. There was a stag do. There was weddings. There was, nights out with my wife, nights out with friends. Actually, the crazy thing was, mate, I enjoyed them more because firstly, I wasn't drunk. So, I remember it all. And I had genuine conversations with people. We've all sat next to that drunk person who repeats themselves 5 times. So instead of you sitting next, me and another drunk person sitting there repeating ourselves, or me being the drunk person, you just have some sensible conversations. And I remember thinking I was always only going to do it for 3 months. And I was like, at the end of this 3 months, well, I don't want to go back. And I remember I had 3 months had gone, I had a few glasses of wine. And all that happened, I felt tired. And the next morning I had a hangover. And I'm like, so all I'm doing is feeling worse. What's going on? And that was really it, mate. And I think the massive benefits and why genuinely I think anyone can benefit from just a few months off is that point around anxiety and around social confidence. We talked about just a minute ago how I sort of, I'd always blame myself for things, and everyone does. But when you realize everyone else is as anxious as you sort of get relaxed with it. And then actually, I'm not the sort of guy who needs a beer, as in sort of to be able to talk to people. But that obviously took a bit of time with those 3 months. And once I got there, I was like, well, I can go to one of these events and not have a beer. And it just means at the end of the night, I'm not the one falling asleep throwing up.
Yeah.
That feels better for life. So yeah, I mean, that's...
And did it, from a work perspective, has it helped you over the last year? Has it given you more? Because a lot of people say it gives you more energy, and I've felt that from the time that I've...
I was going to say, you were saying you're drinking less as well.
I'm trying, definitely. I'm limiting. I can't say I'm teetotal, but I'm drinking less. Yeah. And that was a conscious health decision. And I must say, I feel more energized. Definitely the less frequent hangovers are helpful, especially when you have a 3.5-year-old.
Well, yeah. I mean, we will have kids at some point, but how I'm terrible without sleep. So I don't know how you deal with children, but massively. I think I would never say it's the direct link. Again, I don't think in life there's any. I think we're always searching for that. Did X got Y? But actually, yes, massively, mate, because I don't wake up with a hangover. And actually, the thing I always remember, and I'm sure 99% of the world do this, perfectly normal, is you go home on a Friday and it's like, relax. Going to have 4, a couple of cans or 3 cans or a bottle of wine. Bottle of wine turns into 2 bottles of wine between, you and your partner, you just have a couple of bottles of wine. And then you've got a hangover and you feel crap the next day, you've had no sleep, you repeat that. And now, I think in London, particularly when I was here, and I don't live here now, so I can't speak for it, is I think booze is a big part of the culture. And in our industry, booze is a big part of the culture. But that was another one. Actually, I'm doing him a disservice because it was one of the things that led me to pause drinking was actually Adrian. So Adrian Betteridge from Baringa. Because another, when I was younger in my career, another belief was like, well, the big guys drink, the partners, and they go out for dinners and drinks. So I've got to do that. I've got to go for drinks and I've got to go for dinners and get pissed with the client because that's what you do. And then here's a guy who's phenomenally successful, leading the biggest consultancy outside the Big Four, growing it rapidly, and he doesn't drink. And it's not held him back. He's, I don't actually know how old Adrian is, but he's young, doing very well for himself for his age, been phenomenally successful. He's never drunk. So, there was that role model thing of, well, actually, if he can do it, maybe it's okay not to. And that was sort of why I wrote the blog, was a couple of friends have been like, I'd love to do it, but I can't. No, you can. You don't want to, or you're not ready for that. That's fine. But hopefully this helps you share that experience. Because that, again, to the podcast, by sharing experiences of all these great consulting entrepreneurs, and for you entrepreneurs, I make that sound like they're different. Entrepreneurs who do different things. You realize they're all normal people. They're that sort of Tim Scorer as I met him. Everyone's normal. Everyone's got a different story and everyone's got a different past, but they all have similarities. If you can pick those, they're the key thing. So yeah, mate, I don't know. Does that answer the alcohol question?
I think it's really important to share these sorts of things, and I think there are a lot of people out there that will either be in now or have been in the situation that you were when you made that decision. And I think by talking about it and getting it out in the open, it becomes less of this myth that
completely.
it changes your life, and that it's not for everyone, but at the same time I think there are lots of people that will hopefully learn from that and appreciate you saying it. So thank you for sharing.
Not at all.
We are sadly down to our last few questions. So
I know we've got an early start tomorrow.
Yeah, we have. So we'll keep these relatively short and sweet. But you alluded to role models, and given that I'm the host of a podcast called The 40-Minute Mentor, it'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about mentorship, because I'm a big believer in it, and it comes in lots of different forms. So who is your mentor, or who are your mentors, and how have they helped your career?
You said keep it brief, mate. You've realised I'm a talker. Mentorship's massive. I know we've talked about it. You run a podcast on it. I think everyone should have mentorship, and that comes in all forms. I know you're quite an advocate of formal, among other forms, formal mentorship. I've always had informal mentors. But that ultimately learning from people who have been where you've been, where you want to get to, is the easiest thing to do. I can't remember where I read it or heard it, but it's sort of, don't ask me for advice on your career. Ask someone who you want to emulate. So massively, every one of my guests has been a mentor because I've learned something from them. I always think particularly with the interviews, if I learned one thing, it's been a success. And, I can guarantee you everyone has exceeded that low bar of one thing. I think in terms of, my consulting time, the partners at Baringa are a massive sort of role models for me and massive mentors. And again, given that I don't know if people are happy to be talked about, I'm not, but the people who are will know who they are. And so actually those people, likewise, I think you can get mentorship and guidance from people you don't know, much like you do your podcast, is by listening to you and your guests, people learn. And so, the likes of a Tim Ferriss, his book has changed my life. And that sounds really grandiose, but actually his book changed the course. Likewise, Tony Robbins, if you've not read either of those people's books, go and buy them. They're like £6. What are you doing? And as we found out when we went for drinks the other day, that's pretty much a pint in London, pint or book. So loads. Those are a few. I'm trying to think who else. Yeah, I think that's a short answer. But
it's really great to hear. And I know you're a big reader. So another form, not quite a mentorship, but you mentioned Tony Robbins, and I'd love to hear, and I know you always ask this on your podcast, so I have to get this one in. What are the book or books that you've given to people, or that you recommend to friends or colleagues?
Well, firstly, I'd say listen to episode 9 of the show, because that is
the best books.
That's the best books, but that's the cop-out answer. So, it depends what you want, but we've talked about some. Go and read, if you are 20s to 30s, not sure what you're doing, go and read Tim Ferriss' The 4-Hour Workweek. Go and read Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within. Go and read David Schwartz' The Magic of Thinking Big. If you are any age, go and read How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think the one thing that amazes me in consulting is everyone in consulting is exceptional, but there are some people who aren't as good with people as others in a people business. And whatever you do, doesn't matter your career, being good with people will help you. Unless you are I don't even know, unless you do something which does not touch people, you need people skills. So massively, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Those are probably everything for now. I think right now I'm reading Jim Collins' Good to Great, which is awesome. I don't know if you've read it.
No, I haven't.
Read it. I'm getting a list to send you. I keep saying I'll send you books. Brilliant book. So I was gifted actually by one of my guests, Dave Kelly, Turning the Flywheel. So we share an office with them in Bath. Former guest on the show, and he gave me Turning the Flywheel, which is a small part of it. Peter actually gave me, who I mentioned earlier, very kindly gave me Good to Great. Awesome book, particularly for an entrepreneur like yourself. So I will get that. But those are, for me, the books that have really impacted my life.
And I said I'm going to get you The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz.
You did. We'll trade. We'll have a trade.
Good stuff. And finally, Nick, another question that you ask your guests. So I think it's important to turn it around on you. If you had 3 people in front of you, one starting their consulting career, one sort of 4 or 5 years in, a manager type grade, or one approaching partner, what one piece of advice would you give for each one of those people?
I realise now, actually being on the other side of some of these
things, it's not that easy, is it?
How difficult they are. I'm not pausing just for dramatic effect. So if I take the first person, so just starting, and I'm repeating some advice from some of my guests. So go and learn, do everything. Take the project that you think's awful. The PMO role up in Scunthorpe, nothing wrong with Scunthorpe, but it's far away from London. Go and take it, because you will learn the most on the shit projects. And that's not, whatever you do, get learning opportunities and learn and do it and be humble. I think it's so easy. And everyone talks about millennials these days, and I can't tell you if it's true or not, but everyone talks about them being snowflakes. If you want to get ahead in any career, just go and do the stuff. Get known as someone who can do, because you will get more stuff. Think of it like a computer game. You've got to get through levels 1 to 5 to get to level 6. Go and get through level 1 to 5, even if it's rubbish. Quite simple. I think manager is then know why you're in it. You've got to that point where, and actually, again, it's worth saying, I feel I never got to manager, so I'm all sort of, this is secondhand, but you've got to the point where you've got skills. You've got a track record. You can go out to someone like yourself and go, Mitty, what else is out there? And learn when you want to get off the bus. Learn, are you in consulting for life because you love it and you see yourself doing it forever, or, financially it works for you, whatever it is. Make that decision and decide where you want to get off the bus. Because I think it's a fourth group I don't ask in here, and I realize it's unfair, is I think, and this could be controversial, I don't know, I talk about people who are going to make partner. I think there is a group in our industry who gets stuck in the senior grades. And that is the group that, hopefully through some of the things I've said and through the interview, because I speak to some of them about this, I get people contact me off on the podcast, is consulting is brilliant if you want it to be. If you hate it, it's the worst thing in the world. Who wants to be away from their family 4 nights a week, working 12-hour days, if you don't love it? And other guests have made this point around loving it. And so there's sort of an extension to manager, which is if you're anywhere between manager and director, and even probably partner, and you don't love it, get out. Because I've seen so many, you probably get
all the time.
And the hard thing is then you get trapped in that world of you're making phenomenal money, and there's a change, and maybe that's a slight step down in salary, maybe it's a change in responsibility, but take control of your career, know where you're going. And almost the hardest thing, I guess, must be, you probably have these conversations more than I do, know if you're not going to make it.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing, isn't it? The carrot is often there. It's just kept just out of reach. And I think we find, the one thing I would say to add to that is you have options. One of the great things about being a consultant and the skill set you develop is that it will give you options, whether it's going in-house, whether it's going contracting, going from a big consultancy to a smaller one. There are opportunities to change the situation you're in. And I think sometimes it's just, taking the plunge and believing in all those great skills you picked up along the way, especially if you're at that level.
Oh, completely. And that's, I think it's knowing that, because I think often when you're in the thick of it, it seems like there aren't. But knowing someone like you, go and speak to James and his team at JBM, and they're brilliant.
Thank you.
Got to get a plug in there. And then I think the last group, and I've got no advice for how to be a good partner. I've never been there. But all I can say, having been on the other end, is remember what got you there. And remember the little people. Yeah. And I think the best partners I've worked for, the ones I looked up to and I still look up to, are the ones who would make you feel like the only one in the room when they talk to you, even though you were an analyst or a consultant or a senior consultant. And from a career perspective, they need to motivate you. There is, a lot of consultancies put a lot of focus on their people, but ultimately juniors can sniff a mile away if you're in it for yourself, or you're in it for others. And I remember there's, we all know people who are in both camps. And that's my only thing, is don't forget, as a leader of a business, what's got you there, who's got you there, and remember what it was like when you were 22.
I think that's brilliant advice. And I think it transcends industries and outside of consulting, just from a leadership perspective. Don't forget what it was like when you were 21 just starting.
Yeah, and I'm sure I make those mistakes. I'm sure you do, but do your best not to. So that is my 4, not 3 bits of advice, mate.
Thank you very much, Nick. So if people want to connect, I'm sure they know how to get hold of you, but is there any...
I run a little podcast.
Where do you want to point them? Which direction?
If you are listening to this or you've watched us, and thank you to anyone who has stuck through this, you know who we are. But Nick at createengage.co.uk, Nick at climbingconsulting.com, both websites are there. You've got me on LinkedIn. And do, I say this at the end of every episode and start, is doing these podcasts is quite a solitary thing. I have the conversations with the guests, and I love conversations like this, but you don't know if anyone's enjoying it. You don't know if anyone's listening. I see numbers on a screen, and I really do mean, and I really do value when a listener messages me and says, that interview did this for me, or I really got this from that interview, or that person helped me change something. That's amazing. I don't care if it makes money. If I'm helping people improve their situation or their career or how they think about something because I've provided an interview, that's amazing. So please do let me know if you're enjoying it. Maybe don't tell me if you think it's rubbish, but let me know if you're enjoying it. Feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, congratulations on getting to 50 podcasts. Here's to the next 50, and thanks very much for sharing your story.
No, thank you very much for being the interviewer.
Absolute pleasure.
And thank you to those who've watched and stuck with us till the end. Cheers.
Thanks, Nick.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Climb in Consulting podcast. If you did, I would be very grateful if you could leave a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcast platform of choice, whichever one you may be using. And please also share this with anyone that you think could benefit from hearing today's interview. If you want to get in touch or give me any feedback about the podcast, please feel free to drop me an email. It's nick@climbinconsulting.com, and I look forward to hearing from you.